Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're well. My name is Alex, and this is Slumber Time Podcast. Today, we'll be looking at the top 3 poems I have ever written, as well as a story after that. Now, 2 of which I wrote in high school, and I must say that I would not call myself a poet. I generally start and stop writing a lot, so I wouldn't expect too many more of these from me in the future. But for me, poetry was one way for me to vent my frustrations and feelings. Now I don't have exactly the same muses I had then, so everything's changed a little bit. The inspiration I get tends to come and go. Most of the poems I wrote in high school, I would honestly be ashamed to show them to anyone for really just how pretentious they are. I don't recommend searching for them. I, however, do have a couple today that I'm actually proud of and happy to share. Well, let's not waste any time with introductions, so let's jump right in. First off, we have The Waterfall. The wind tremulously swayed above the shattered, jagged rocks. The power of it was almost demented, startling even those who were normally not prone to terror. The light made it glitter, giving it a phosphorescent sheen in the moonlit evening. To the few standing below, the torrid spray of the billowing waterfall was looming in its vastness, with every iridescent drop. Yeah, if I remember correctly, this was part of a class project in high school. We had to make a poem using a lot of vocabulary words from a list, and in the original, I used way too many. And yeah, it was bogged down in detail, but looking back at it after the first time in 8 or 9 years, I realized that it had a lot of potential. I edited a few of the really strange points, and really, like, the imagery in it is what I've always wanted in my writing. And yeah, I can't find it in any other pieces. So maybe if you give me a vocab list and tell me to make a poem, I might be able to do it again. As for the next one, I think this turned out the best of all of my poems. I was 16 or 17, I think, and the time I wrote it, I was half asleep in my car on my way either to or from my grandparents' house. I really can't remember, and yeah, the drive was a 13-hour car trip, so I had nothing better to do, and this one just came to mind. So here is I Am. Who am I? I am the one who had to live with his death. I am the boy whose childhood was stolen. I am the man who lost his wife to another. I am the grandfather who regrets his past. I am nothing which found hope. I am the hope that was fake. I am existing in this nothingness. I am not. I am not dead anymore. I am not the boy my parents once knew. I am not the man whose happiness was everlasting. I am not the grandfather without a future. I am a new person. I am something. Who am I? I am. You can probably tell that I was heavily influenced by Descartes when writing this. I tended to use his philosophy in a lot of my speeches in high school, and what I really like about it is that it's a hopeful poem. I really didn't have many others like this at the time, I think, so this one really stands out. All the others were just me complaining. So, yeah, this does still play off some of the negativity I felt at that point, but I knew that I wanted to get past it all and find out who I actually am. So, I gotta say that I'm still searching. I'm still in my 20s, but I know that I am something. So, I'm pretty happy with the message that you can read into this one. At this point, I'd like to give a shout out to my good friend PJ, who I have mentioned before. He just started a podcast called Kant's Dream, which I'll link to episode 1 below. He included this poem in it, and if you enjoy music and philosophical discussions, check him out. His first podcast is his dissection of youth and how it can be exemplified in different ways. It's a really good one for relaxing too. I also, at one point, thought of more comedic writing. I got into that more recently. I won't include these two I'll mention here in my top 3 best poems, but I still think they're fun, so let's check them out. Number 1, there once was a man from Nantucket who was shot in the head and kicked the bucket. There's nothing else to be said, for this man is dead, so to end this poem I'll say suck it. And 2, if a woodchuck could chuck wood, who would they hit first? Yeah, I might add that the original ending to the first one was slightly different. I bet you can guess what it was, but yeah, I'm going to keep it family friendly, and YouTube can be strict about that. I also find, these types of poems are really, really fun to do. I hope to have some more in the future. I do have a couple others, but I like to edit them down first since they're still not really up to my standards. The one I was really intent on finishing from that period is not as funny, but I really enjoyed putting it together. I finally finished it after putting it off for maybe a year, so tell me what you think about this one. A frightening father figure figured that from his fine flock of pheasants his famous ferocious fowl should fight a fat, foolish peasant. The passionate, pimply peasant, having provoked the pretentious, plump priest, so to placate this pious Protestant, he'll pulverize the postulant's pet beast. The boy boisterously bet he'll beat the boorish, barbaric brute with his big, bulky boomerang and his bald, baggy boot. But to defeat this dastardly demon of the devilishly devout despot, he devised to distract the duo, dazing the deviously dumb zealot. Hooray! Hailed the hero, having hit the now humbled, heartless heathen, the hurt hen helpless and now hardly breathing. Verily, the vindictive venal villain was very vexed. Victory, vouchsafed the vermin, vehemently vowing vengeance with a hex. I have to say, this poem was a pain in the neck to write. I know I have more on the cutting room floor than I have actually written here. I originally intended for this to be about 2 or 3 times longer, but after putting a lot of thought into each line, I knew there was just no way I could keep it going. The alliteration in it, the rhyming, it took quite a few hours of searching for words that would fit in different places. For those who have a large lexicon, I bet they could expand on it, but honestly, I don't. I kept using a rhyming dictionary and a lot of Google searches. There were even a couple letters that I had lines for, but I just didn't put into this. So I think there was Y, him saying yippee, and how he usurped the priest, but I think it just didn't work out. Still, I find this to be a really fun poem. It's nice to read, nice to hear. It was inspired by the Grip Top Sock tongue twister, and I think this could be fun to do for theater students when warming up. The first 2 lines especially kept tripping me up, but yeah, I've always been a fan of tongue twisters, and I just happened to get some general meter that I liked, and it was stuck in my head, so I just put words to it. The first 2 lines were not really difficult at all, but the third one took much longer. It made me put it all on the back burner for, about a year. And finally, a couple days ago, I just completed the last 3 lines. And it's not the best way to write a poem. My advice, if I can even give any, since I'm not a poet, it's to allow the poems to happen naturally. If you try to force them, they're gonna feel stilted. If it's natural, the poem will feel smooth. So yeah, to avoid being pretentious like many of my other poems, do try to just let it happen. But again, please don't search for my other poems. Alright, so that's what I had prepared for what I wrote today. I'd now like to move on to a story that will likely take up the rest of today's time. It's a slightly different tone, but I've been wanting to include Chekhov in some way for a while. And if you know him, he's a comedic writer, but also with a lot of really beautiful imagery in it. He's famous for plays like Uncle Vanya, The Cherry Orchard, The Seagull. Sadly, they are full-length plays, and I do not have the time, nor do I know if I'd even be allowed to read them here, but luckily he has a lot of short stories, and if you like this one and you want to read more, they're all on Project Gutenberg. Without further ado, this is A Joke by Anton Chekhov. It was a bright winter midday. There was a sharp snapping frost in the curls on Nadenka's temples, and the down on her upper lip were covered with silvery frost. She was holding my arm, and we were standing on a high hill. From where we stood to the ground below there stretched a smooth, sloping descent, in which the sun was reflected as in a looking-glass. Beside us was a little sledge lined with bright red cloth. "Let us go down, Nadezhda Petrovna," I besought her. "Only once. I assure you we shall be all right and not hurt." But Nadenka was afraid. The slope from her little galoshes to the bottom of the ice hill seemed to her a terrible, immensely deep abyss. Her spirit failed her, and she held her breath as she looked down, when I merely suggested her getting into the sledge. But what would it be if she were to risk flying into the abyss? She would die. She would go out of her mind. "I entreat you," I said. "You mustn't be afraid. You know it's poor-spirited. It's cowardly." Nadenka gave way at last, and from her face I saw that she gave way in mortal dread. I sat her in the sledge, pale and trembling, put my arm around her, and with her cast myself down the precipice. The sledge flew like a bullet. The air cleft by our flight beat in our faces, roared, whistled in our ears, tore at us, nipped us cruelly in its anger, tried to tear our heads off our shoulders. We had hardly strength to breathe from this pressure of the wind. It seemed as though the devil himself had caught us in his claws and was dragging us with a roar to hell. Surrounding objects melted into one long, furiously racing streak. Another moment, and it seemed we should perish. "I love you, Nadia," I said in a low voice. The sledge began moving more and more slowly. The roar of the wind and the whir of the runners was no longer so terrible. It was easier to breathe, and at last we were at the bottom. Nadenka was more dead than alive. She was pale and scarcely breathing. I helped her to get up. "Nothing would induce me to go again," she said, looking at me with eyes full of horror. "Nothing in the world. I almost died." A little later she recovered herself and looked inquiringly into my eyes, wondering had I really uttered those 4 words, or had she fancied them in the roar of the hurricane. And I stood beside her smoking and looking attentively at my glove. She took my arm, and we spent a long while walking near the ice hill. The riddle evidently would not let her rest. Had those words been uttered or not? Yes or no? Yes or no? It was the question of pride, of honor, of life. A very important question, the most important question in the world. Nadenka kept impatiently, sorrowfully looking into my face with a penetrating glance. She answered at random, waiting to see whether I would not speak. Oh, the play of feeling on that sweet face! I saw that she was struggling with herself, that she wanted to say something, to ask some question, but she could not find the words. She felt awkward and frightened and troubled by her joy. "Do you know what?" she said without looking at me. "Well?" I asked. "Let us slide down again." We clambered up the ice hill by the steps again. I sat Nadenka, pale and trembling, in the sledge, and again we flew into the terrible abyss. Again the wind roared and the runners whirred, and again when the flight of our sledge was at its swiftest and noisiest, I said in a low voice, "I love you, Nadenka." When the sledge stopped, Nadenka flung a glance at the hill down which we had both slid, then bent a long look upon my face, listened to my voice, which was unconcerned and passionless, and the whole of her little figure, every bit of it, even her muff and her hood, expressed the utmost bewilderment, and on her face was written, "What does it mean? Who uttered those words? Did he, or did I only fancy it?" The uncertainty worried her and drove her out of all patience. The poor girl did not answer my questions, frowned, and was on the point of tears. "Hadn't we better go home?" I asked. "Well, I like this tobogganing," she said, flushing. "Shall we go down once more?" She liked tobogganing, and yet as she got into the sled she was, as both times before, pale, trembling, hardly able to breathe for terror. We went down for the third time, and I saw she was looking at my face and watching my lips. But I put my handkerchief to my lips, coughed, and when we reached the middle of the hill, I succeeded in bringing out, "I love you, Nadia." And the mystery remained a mystery. Nadenka was silent, pondering on something. I saw her home. She tried to walk slowly, slackened her pace, and kept waiting to see whether I would not say those words to her. And I saw how her soul was suffering. What effort she was making not to say to herself, "It cannot be that the wind said them, and I don't want it to be the wind that said them." Next morning I got a little note. "If you're tobogganing today, come for me. In." And from that time I began going every day tobogganing with Nadenka. And as we flew down in the sledge, every time I pronounced in a low voice the same words, "I love you, Nadia." Soon Nadenka grew used to that phrase as to alcohol or morphia. She could not live without it. It is true that flying down the ice hill terrified her as before, but now the terror and danger gave a peculiar fascination to words of love, words which as before were a mystery and tantalized the soul. The same, too, the wind and I were still suspected. Which of the two was making love to her she did not know, but apparently by now she did not care. From which goblet one drinks matters little, if only the beverage is intoxicating. It happened I went to the skating ground alone at midday. Mingling with the crowd, I saw Nadenka go up to the ice hill and look about for me. Then she timidly mounted the steps. She was frightened of going alone. Oh, how frightened! She was white as the snow. She was trembling. She went as though to the scaffold, but she went without looking back resolutely. She had evidently determined to put it to the test at last. Would those sweet, amazing words be heard when I was not there? I saw her, pale, her lips parted with horror, getting into the sledge, shut her eyes, and saying goodbye forever to the earth, set off. "Brr," whirred the runners. Whether Nadenka heard those words, I do not know. I only saw her getting up from the sledge, looking faint and exhausted, and one could tell from her face that she could not tell herself whether she had heard anything or not. Her terror, while she had been flying down, had deprived her of all power of hearing, of discriminating sounds, of understanding. But then the month of March arrived. The spring sunshine was more kindly. Our ice hill turned dark, lost its brilliance, and finally melted. We gave up tobogganing. There was nowhere now where poor Nadenka could hear those words, and indeed no one to utter them, since there was no wind, and I was going to Petersburg for long, perhaps forever. It happened 2 days before my departure. I was sitting in the dusk in the little garden which was separated from the yard of Nadenka's house by a high fence with nails in it. It was still pretty cold, and there was still snow by the manure heap. The trees looked dead, but there was already the scent of spring, and the rooks were cawing loudly as they settled for their night's rest. I went up to the fence and stood for a long while peeping through a chink. I saw Nadenka come out into the porch and fix a mournful, yearning gaze on the sky. The spring wind was blowing straight into her pale, dejected face. It reminded her of the wind which roared at us on the ice hill when she heard those 4 words, and her face became very, very sorrowful. A tear trickled down her cheek, and the poor child held out both arms as though begging the wind to bring her those words once more. And waiting for that wind, I said in a low voice, "I love you, Nadia." Mercy! The change that came over Nadenka! She uttered a cry, smiled all over her face, and looking joyful, happy, and beautiful, held out her arms to meet the wind. And I went off to pack up. That was long ago. Now Nadenka is married. She married, whether of her own choice or not does not matter, a secretary of the nobility wardenship. And now she has 3 children. That we once went tobogganing together, and that the wind brought her the words, "I love you, Nadenka," is not forgotten. It is, for her now, the happiest, most touching and beautiful memory in her life, but now that I am older, I cannot understand why I uttered those words. What was my motive in that joke? What most people don't understand about Chekhov is his comedy. His plays are supposed to be that way, and they are dreadful if done seriously. Even Henrik Ibsen, author of A Doll's House, failed to direct it that way. This short story gets into the darker humor that Chekhov uses. He loved to include irony and sometimes even sarcasm in his pieces. It's often hard to read the comedy in them, and I will say it even took me a couple of reads to even understand the general tone that the narrator has, but I will also say that it might not be even what the narrator was supposed to sound like in Chekhov's opinion, but again, I don't really know. For some, they really hate Chekhov for his style. Maybe they just don't understand what Chekhov was going for. Maybe they didn't understand the comedy. Or maybe they do understand it, and it doesn't make it better for them. But for me, I think this one is a really good first step in understanding Chekhov's writing and learning whether you'd like him or not. For those wondering or having difficulty understanding this, what I understand from it, basically Nadia/Nadenka, I'm guessing is a nickname for her. I really don't know, but she enjoyed being told "I love you" by the narrator. Maybe did not mean it, or maybe did not quite understand the impact of those words that they would have on her, and it led to them becoming married. Hence the irony here. All right. If you enjoyed this, please let me know. If you have any recommendations for future poems, short stories, etc., again, your input is very helpful. If you're on Twitch, give a follow. Tell me if you have any pieces you'd like to hear. And if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, drop a comment with any thoughts or recommendations. Just remember, we're here and we're listening.